Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to Hope Rescue Podcast. I'm Kimberly. This is my hot husband, Tim.
Hot husband.
Literally, because it's about
have an-
84 degrees outside. So you're sweaty, smoking
that
hot.
makes me hot. It just makes me sweaty.
And we've been talking about in last week, and we're kind of in a series now on
Last
dealing,
couple of weeks.
Yes, dealing with
Third week.
death and loss and grieving, which we got an interesting text just in between recording this morning from your brother who said, and he was absolutely accurate, Phil. He said, grief is something that we all deal with but are rarely prepared for.
Right.
And that's really true. And loss can look like a lot of different things to a lot of different people, how they're impacted. And I'm chuckling right now. And if for those of you who are watching, this is going to be totally inappropriate joking, but I had a loss this week.
A loss.
I lost a tooth. And
She
so
didn't lose a tooth.
I
It
had
wasn't like
it had
you
to
know,
be pulled. I've been through so much in the last few weeks, and then I had to lose a tooth too. And when I was up with my mom in the Northwest, my cheeks started like swelling. It's really swollen today because they pulled the tooth yesterday. But and turns out it was a tooth that had a root canal, and somehow there was a little nerve left in there that decided to die.
Tell us more.
So now that doesn't even compare to the loss that I've really experienced the last few weeks, which we talked about last week about my daddy. But I will tell you that don't make me laugh too hard today or cry too hard because I'll expose the cavernous gap in my left cheek.
Honey, listen, it's not that bad. You remember
bad.
when Gracie was little and she lost teeth and she didn't want me to pull them out of her mouth?
Yes.
Oh, I love doing that.
Sometimes you trick her. That's
tricked her.
dad stuff right there.
A few times.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we were just kind of processing over this morning, my mom and I, which by the way, you're going to get to hear from her next week. I'm going to be interviewing her because she has walked through this journey. It's been a very personal thing, obviously, losing the love of her life for 58 years, but we're going to get to hear her story and how she has gone through this process with God's help. But we were kind of talking about how everybody experiences grief differently and what made 2020 so unique in the loss of relationships and family members due to COVID and just the turmoil in the world is that in the unique case of COVID, you are separated from the people you love to possibly never see them again and not even knowing that they're on the process to their deathbed.
Right.
And that's what happened with my dad is we were unable to physically touch him, to see him until the very end and after he was unconscious and right before they turned the machines off.
One of the things I would say too is that with COVID, for some people it's coming or it's getting worse and so forth, and he did see that coming. But by the time he realized he's not going to make it, we couldn't see him, but we could FaceTime him.
Yes.
Thank God for
my
technology
goodness. Yes. Zoom.
And Zoom and able to communicate. And the things he said to you and to me
precious.
were just beautiful, and your brothers and so forth. We talked about that last time. But for a lot of people, you don't know, especially if there is an accident or something that is catastrophic
Sudden.
and ends in death. You don't know when is the last time you're going to see somebody. And I think it's really important to make sure that you communicate your love and appreciation and your pride in them and things like that are very, very important. And also to keep up on relationships that are maybe struggling. Everybody has those with parents and sisters, siblings, sisters. I don't know why I sasaid with siblings.
Something
both
coming out in
brothers.
this podcast we don't know about.
I'm good with my sisters.
You've got a few of sisters.
But you just need to keep that on close check.
Yes.
We're going to be talking about the steps of grief, and they're kind of well known, and we're going to unpack that a little bit. But before we do, I just wanted to share something real quickly about the loss of my brother and my father, who died within 2 years of each other, a couple years of each other. My dad died, and he actually knew that he was going to go, kind of like your dad. He knew for a period of time before. He told me, he said, this is the last time I'll see you. I didn't take him seriously, but he was very serious about it. We were down at Seaport Village, and my mother and my father and I had gone to breakfast. My mom
San
went
Diego.
to Seaport Village in San Diego, down by the bay. It was a beautiful day, and my mom went shopping, and they're going to leave to get on a plane pretty quickly after that and then fly home. So I'm sitting there. We're sitting outside on this bench. I know it was back in those days, it was Jolly Roger. They've taken that restaurant out, but it was Jolly Roger. In front of there was a bench, and my father and I were sitting there, and he said the most incredible things to me of a father to a son. I can't recount them because I can't make it through it, but it's just too emotional. But he was just, his pride in me and so forth. It meant so much to me, and I've gone back to that several times in the grieving process, that relationship with my dad. And my dad and I had been close in the last years, the adult years of my life. When we were kids, I didn't so much. But anyway, I just wanted to share something that happened that was so strange at his death. He had a massive stroke when he got on that plane with my mom, flew back home to Tennessee. They lived just east of Knoxville. They were living at the time in Morristown, just east of Knoxville in Tennessee. And they had driven from the airport or been picked up, I can't remember which, and they went into the house, and my dad said, hey, I'm a little bit hungry. Mom was unpacking and so forth. And she was going to make him a sandwich. And while she was unpacking in the bedroom down the hallway from his office, she thought she heard him get up. And so she looked down there, and she saw his feet, which they always were when he prayed, at this spot where he prayed at his desk chair. And she could see his feet.
Knees.
He was on his knees, yeah. So his feet were kind of visible from the hallway, yeah. Well, actually, she noticed they were actually to the side. So he had been toes down, but now the toes were laid over, and she thought maybe he wasn't on his knees. And she came in, and he had had a massive stroke, and he was able to quickly say goodbye to her and say a few last words to her. However, they made it to the hospital. By the time he got there, the stroke was starting to take effect, and anyway, by the time I got there a few days later, he was in a coma and on life support. And we made the decision, there's a long story about that, but we made the decision to take him off life support, and he was moved from intensive care to a private wing, or not a private wing, but a unused wing of the hospital, so we could be private with him. And no one was down that side, so we were able to be in the room with him, my sisters, my mother and I, and there were some other relatives there, my aunt. Anyway, so he didn't move that whole time, the whole time he was there. And then one day, after a few days of being there, his breathing changed, and it became very, very much struggling. And as he struggled to breathe, you could see he was fighting to stay alive. However, just then I noticed his eyes moving, like if you've ever watched somebody sleeping, that's creepy, by the way, but if you ever watch somebody sleeping and they're having REM, rapid eye movement sleep, their eyes dart back and forth, and you can see it under the eyelids. And I saw that in his eyes, and I saw his eyes moving back and forth. And just after I saw his eyes moving back and forth, and you take this for whatever you want, but he stopped breathing hard, and his breathing became more mellow and without that struggle. And just within a minute or so, his breathing became more and more shallow. And then I saw a tear come out of his right eye, down his cheek. And he took his last breath. Now, I don't know what was going on. It could have been the medication he had been on or whatever. I don't know. He was on no medication at that time. But I do believe that it's very possible that my dad saw into heaven. And as he was being transported, he saw the glories of heaven and just quit fighting. And he went into the presence of the Lord. My sisters, my mom, my aunt, my brother-in-law, David, were there. And it was just a time of, he's gone.
Yeah.
And we stayed there for quite some time. And it's such a powerful memory. And in the grieving process, many times I have gone back to that very moment and thought about that moment and reminded, as I've heard my mother-in-law say and my wife and my brother-in-law say, they know that their father, their husband is in heaven. And it's comforting. It's a powerful thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And,
It's also painful though. And the tough part is that, there's that tension when everybody's grieving and you personally are grieving in that moment, but there's people who are closer to him that are grieving more. Like I walked through that situation with my mom. You almost put your own pain on pause because you carry the hearts of the people you love the most and that loved him closest, And so walking through that with my dad, just watching my mom say her final goodbyes and the deep sobbing that happened, and she told me afterwards, she said, I'm not sad because he's gone. She said, actually, I feel relieved that he's in the presence of the Lord. And but still there's that loss and navigating the shock of that week with her and her heartbreak, and almost there's like a complete you're going through motions. We were all going through motions when you're trying to scramble behind something like that. And within that week, we had her things packed up and her headed to be moved here in with us. So she's been through so much. So I really look forward to talking with her about that next week.
Yeah. And we're going to get into some details about grieving and some teaching on that in just a moment. But I just wanted to share briefly about my brother. Sometimes I shared this in a message I gave at Torrey Pines Church a few weeks ago. And in that, I shared that when someone dies that you love, there may be someone closer to them than you.
Yeah.
Like, for example, my mother-in-law. I loved my father-in-law, but I was not as close as my wife was to him, or my mother-in-law, obviously. And so when you kind of take a back seat to that.
Right.
And I had a tremendous amount of love for my brother Dan, but when he died, the closest people to him were his wife, his widow now, and his children, his 5 children who were left behind. And I remember going and dealing with the details of his death. I flew out to Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas, to ID his body and prepare a message. I did his funeral. It was a military funeral in a graveside, and there were full honors, and all of that had taken place. He had fallen in battle. He was killed, shot down by the enemy, and killed in the plane or in the helicopter he was flying. And, so I had to ID his body. I had to make preparation for that funeral, coordinate with the base commander and all of the different things that we had to do. And I had to then love on my nieces and my nephew, my sister-in-law. And they had gone through tremendous loss. There were other family members there that had lost. My parents lost their son, and I'm trying to minister to them as well. So there was a lot of doing and not a lot of grieving.
Yes.
And the grieving didn't happen until I got home, and that's when I began to feel that the depth of that loss.
Sorrow.
But everybody grieves differently,
Yeah.
and there are really 2 kinds of grieving that we go through, and they're really only 2 in Scripture.
Yeah, it's very simple. It's those who mourn without hope and those who mourn with hope. And my goodness, is there ever a difference in the 2?
Yeah.
And
I've seen people who've mourned without
hope. Yeah, it's
despair.
It's despair, exactly. Heartbreaking to watch, and And it's devastating because there will never be closure for
Right.
them,
Yeah.
in that heartbreak and that pain. But as Scripture talks about mourning with hope, you are allowed to step into that space of grief and sadness and sorrow of losing someone you love. But there is that underlying hope that anchors you to knowing, first of all, that they are with their creator in Christ, in the presence of the Lord, but also that you'll join them someday there. And as I process that, even with my dad, in this last just few weeks, his cousin joined him, my cousin Pam, and he joined his parents. And you imagine the reunion that they're having, and the joy and the hope that brings to me.
Yeah. So, 1 Thessalonians 4:13 talks about this grieving, but not grieving as those who don't have hope. So I want to say, don't feel guilty when you grieve.
Mm-hmm.
Don't feel guilty when you're sad. Don't feel guilty when you cry. Oh, she was so strong, she didn't even cry. That's not what we're looking for, and that's not helpful.
That's not healthy.
I think you need to grieve well. And grieving well means running through the process of the emotions and the loss and what it's going to mean in the change of your life, especially if you lived with that person, if that person was a spouse of yours or a child of yours or a parent of yours, someone who was very close. You're going to have to process through the emotions and through the loss. And that is painful.
Yes.
And in no way do we want to say it's not painful, because it is. It's very painful. Everybody grieves differently. If you don't shed tears, don't feel guilty about not shedding tears. Don't feel guilty about grieving only in private. If you're not a public person, maybe you don't want to grieve in front of other people, or you want to be strong for other people. I think that you have to process this your best
Give
way.
yourself permission to do it your best way.
Yeah.
And be careful not to judge people around you because they don't look like they're sad or acting the way you think they should. It's such a personal process.
Yeah. We are, I hear from my daughter, Gracie, and from Kimberly all the time about Enneagrams. And they say that because I am the black hole of Enneagrams.
No.
8.
You're not the
Oh,
black
they look to me for leadership,
Dave.
but when they want something organized and something done, yes, I'm a go-to. But
Yes.
I'm kind of the
Babe, you have
Yeah,
a tender
it's-
heart, but you're
yeah.
you're a fixer guy.
Yeah.
You
But
are a
anyway.
get her done guy.
Yeah,
Thank God for the 8s.
I don't even know what I think about Enneagrams, but I do know I think about different personalities and different ways of looking at life. If that's true in the way we deal with life, it's certainly going to be true in the way we deal with death.
Yes, and thank God
yeah.
for that too,
Yeah.
because I've thought about that often, like how even though you are in brackets an outsider in that you're not one of the siblings, your natural place in this whole situation with my mom has been to step into, let's coordinate her coming home, let's bring her here, let's bring her home and get her settled. Let's get planned for the memorial. That's, you go into that mode, which the rest of us are just in shell shock still, trying to and so I'm so grateful for that, because that's even for the person like my mom who's lost has been the greatest. She can't even fathom putting those things together. Understandably.
And for me, it's like at my brother Dan's funeral, my dad's funeral, my mother's funeral years later, which was just 7 years ago, I think it is now. And all the different people that have passed in my family, I've done all the funerals.
Yeah.
And it's my way of grieving and my way of dealing.
Sure.
And so don't feel guilty about that.
Yeah.
Be who you are and the way God has made you. And if you feel like shutting down, it's okay, but eventually you're going to have to get on the other side of that.
What I would say to that, though, is that in those moments when you want to cry, you just do it.
Yeah.
Excuse yourself and go and do it. Allow room for that.
Yes.
Even the guys who are in charge of everything have those waves. Like my brother Jamie tends to be that way, where just all of a sudden then it just comes and then he gets back up and he starts getting stuff done.
Yes.
So it's so important.
Well, we want to talk about the stages of grief. So just want to spend a few moments on it. But so you've probably heard of this, the stages of grief. They go like this: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. But before we get into it, I really wanted to stop and talk about some of the myths versus the realities of that. The first one, understand that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is the author of the book where these stages are mentioned. On Death and Dying, I think was the name of the book. I'm not sure. I actually never read it, but I know all about these 5 steps.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'll bet if we could see your hands, if we say everybody that raise your hand if you know, you do know. You may not remember every one, but you remember that there are 5 steps. And the first thing that is a myth is that these are linear, that you start with denial. The first time you start with denial, then to anger, then to bargaining, then to depression, and then to acceptance. She never meant it to be that way. And before she passed, she died, I think, in maybe 1976, or maybe it was later. I don't know. Maybe that's when she wrote the book. But anyway, it was later that she passed, but she said, I never meant for it to be linear. It wasn't these stages, but the word stage made it sound like this is stage 1, stage 2. So please don't go there, because what happens is now you feel like, hey,
I skipped a step.
When's the anger coming? I'm not angry,
Right.
or when's the bargaining coming? So that's one thing. The second thing is, she originally developed these stages to describe patients that had received a terminal illness, or they had been told they have a terminal illness, and it was their process she was talking about. She was not talking about when you lose. But let me tell you what happened in psychology world was she wrote this about how to deal with when you're told you have a terminal illness, and that's your diagnosis. You're going to live for X number of months or a year, whatever. That's what you go through. You go through denial. No, I reject that. And then you go through anger. I don't deserve this. And then bargaining. God, I'll do anything. But she didn't mean it to be for loss, but it was so closely characterized of people who had lost a loved one that it became actually the 5 steps of grief, not the 5 steps of dealing with death and dying.
Wow.
And so we're going to first take this from the standpoint of the process of a diagnosis, because both of us have received not a terminal illness diagnosis.
We didn't know at the time.
But we didn't know. We both had to deal with our mortality. You were pretty young. I was not that young.
Well,
but you were in
53. Well, 52.
No. Really?
With when I had my brain tumor?
Yeah.
Yeah, 52.
Wow. You're older than I thought. How old are you? Wow. My goodness.
But thank you that you think that's young.
Anyway, so she gets this diagnosis. We both are dealing with this could be terminal.
Yes.
You hear brain tumor, you don't go, oh, cool. Okay, I'll just take some aspirin.
Yes.
No. Brain surgery is the first step.
Right.
Or ignore it, and that's not good.
That's not good.
And a lot of people do.
And just as a background, I lost my sweetest aunt to a brain tumor. And from the time she was diagnosed to the time that she passed was 6 months. And that was devastating to our family. So when I found out I had one, of course, your mind immediately thinks.
How long was it? For 6 months?
6 months from the time she was diagnosed with it to the time she passed was exactly 6 months.
So you get that, and the first reaction is, oh, no.
Right.
I don't have that. Our first reaction, because I was given a diagnosis of cancer, and immediately I accepted it.
Yeah.
I accepted the reality of that.
Yeah.
And I accepted, I didn't go through anger. I didn't go through bargaining.
I did all those things.
I didn't go through depression. I went right to acceptance.
Yeah.
And I mean, I got that call on May 5th, 2017, our anniversary. We were eating in a restaurant in Portland, Oregon. We both remember this well. We had ordered our food. Our food was getting ready to come. I got a phone call. I recognized that as my doctor's number. I went out to the hallway in this beautiful restaurant. It was great. And I went out in the hallway and took the call, and I just okay. But I didn't want to ruin our lunch or our anniversary, so I was going to try to tell her later.
You're not
or
very
something.
good at that stuff.
We were catching a flight to come home, and I sat down, and she goes, "Who was that?" Oh, I said it was the doctor, and she could see on my face something's wrong. I think I ate a pretty good meal, but you didn't eat it all.
I don't think I ate for 3 days. I obviously made up for it.
I had good life insurance, so we had that going for us.
Yeah, obviously that made all the difference to me.
But anyway, I didn't go through that process.
Yeah.
So denial, anger, bargaining, depression,
Yeah.
acceptance. I went right to acceptance. And then I had to kind of help you go through the process of these. Did you go through those?
I did.
Were those characteristic of your...
Yeah, I think I was, because we were in the trenches of your cancer, to get that kind of news. Of course, you're just like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, you're dealing with cancer and I find out I have a brain tumor. And so, yeah, I think I went in and out of a lot of those things. The bargaining thing for sure, like with God, like, please, Lord, like, what do you need me to say right now? Get us out of this, you know?
Here's a typical thing. Lord, I promise I will serve you more if you keep my spouse alive or my child alive, or I will give more money to the church. Or, whatever it is. I'll tell more people about Jesus. And we begin to bargain. Like, God is up there going, okay.
Yeah.
20 more bucks a week and we'll save.
And of course, I'm just thinking, I have my first, our oldest son, Ronnie, is about to have his first baby. I had planned on being that grandma to be able to weekly watch him and help take care of him. And so I went through all the steps in different ways, but for sure some anger.
Yeah.
And I think the denial, I don't remember really going through the denial. You went through the denial that it wasn't a big deal with me.
Yours. I struggled a little more with yours, and but I accepted it, but I never accepted that it was going to be fatal. I did not believe I was going to lose you.
Right.
And of course, just to make it clear, we are both maybe not
We're
perfect
good to go.
from this stuff. We've had some
I'm missing a tooth,
fallout.
a couple teeth,
Well,
and a tumor.
No, I mean the tumor has affected you, and my cancer has affected me to a certain extent, in ways that are manageable.
Yeah.
And you just go, okay, that's life.
Yeah.
But our health is pretty good.
We have each other.
We have each other.
So thank God for that. Where it's
Toothless
so
wife.
so
But
different.
other than that,
I know.
I'm
I
pretty
think they
happy.
took my brain instead of the tumor. They were about the same size. It could have been an easy mix-up.
Well, just as we close this out, when you go through and here's probably the key to this, is that when you're dealing with death and dying, and especially if you're dealing with someone you've lost, you're probably not going to do in denial. You're just going to go to shock. Like, this can't be real. I remember when I got the word that Dan was dying. This can't be real.
Yes.
But it was. And then I didn't have the anger. I didn't have the bargaining, but I felt a mild sense of depression.
Yeah.
And when the acceptance came, which was a couple of weeks after I got back from the funeral, I felt better.
Yeah.
I started to heal. Get to acceptance and the place of hope, because I know I'll see my brother again. And he's changed heaven, by the way. And so is Paul Adams. But when they meet, their humor is going to have a huge
We have
clash.
a sick, twisted sense of humor on both of our families.
Well, listen, we're going to close out this podcast, but we've got a great podcast for you next time, and you're going to hear from a woman who's just lost her husband and how God is pressing in with her and loving her well. If you have not gotten this, I'm holding this up. For those of you who are watching, you can see it. This is book Breathe that is now published, a book that I wrote on overcoming anxiety, depression, and negative emotions. You can get your copy at hoperescue.org or hoperescuepodcast.org. Either one goes the same place, hoperescuepodcast.org. Order that book. If you know a friend or someone that's struggling with that, we'd love for you to get it. God bless you. Have a great week. Don't miss next week on Grieving. We'll see you then.
Bye, guys.